I'm Mariefiebach of feedyourfamilytonight.com, and today we are making total comfort food. This is a tater tot casserole. It is one of my son's favorite meals ever. I have a couple of ways that you can adapt it to your family's taste, and we'll get to that, but it starts with 2 pounds of ground beef. I have pretty lean ground beef, so I haven't had to drain off any fat, but if you have ground beef that has a lot of fat pooling in your pan, you want to make sure to drain that off before you start with the next step. The other thing is when you're doing the ground beef and you're cooking it, I like to just smush it all into one disc and let the bottom get really, really brown before I stir it. And that's going to give you nice, large chunks of meat. It's also going to give you a lot of browning, which is key to the flavor of this casserole. So 2 pounds of ground beef that has been browned, and then I'm adding 1 onion. This onion I pureed. You can use a chopped onion, but my kids are not big fans of finding pieces of onion in their casseroles, and so I usually just puree it. They don't mind the flavor, but they don't like the texture. So you can chop up your onion or you can puree it like I did. It doesn't really matter. And honestly, you can use a white onion or a yellow onion. Those are pretty interchangeable in this recipe. After you add the onion, you're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of coarse sea salt, and then 3 cups of beef broth. I use reduced sodium beef broth so that I have a little more control of the salt in the recipe. If you're using regular beef broth, I would probably omit the salt or taste it to see if it's too salty. You're just going to let this beef broth come up to a boil. And while it comes to a boil, we're going to make what's called a slurry. A slurry is a combination of cornstarch and water, and that's what's going to thicken the sauce for this casserole. I have 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and 1/4 cup of water. And I'm just going to stir this together to create a slurry. I'm going to add this slurry to the casserole. And what this is going to do is as it heats up, it is going to thicken. I'm going to turn my heat up just a bit. You want to make sure when you add that broth that you scrape all the brown bits around the pan, because that is going to help give a lot of flavor to this casserole. So I'm adding this slurry, and you can see there's a little bit that kind of sticks at the bottom, so make sure you stir it in and scrape that all up. As this comes to a boil, it's going to thicken, and that is going to help this casserole have that ooey gooey casserole texture. This will cook for about 3 to 4 minutes until it's slightly thickened, and then this is where you can kind of adapt the recipe to your family's taste. I call for the recipe a 12-ounce bag of frozen mixed vegetables. If your family does not like mixed vegetables, you could use just peas, you could use green beans, you could use just corn, or actually what I'm going to do today for this casserole is I'm going to omit the vegetables altogether because my kids are not the biggest fans of cooked vegetables, but I like the vegetables in the casserole. After this is thickened, you're going to pour the mixture into a 9x13 pan, and you're going to cover it with a 32-ounce bag of tater tots. And you can line them all nice and neat, or you can just dump the whole bag on top. It doesn't matter, and it's going to go into the oven at 400 degrees for 20 minutes. Once the tater tots are all brown and crisp on the top, then you have the second option, which is adding cheese. I like to put 2 cups of shredded cheddar cheese all over the top and bake it at 400 for another 5 to 7 minutes until the cheese is all browned. But if your family's not big on cheese, super simple, just omit the cheese and don't bake it for the second time. This over here is already starting to bubble, and it's starting to thicken up because of that cornstarch slurry. This recipe is at feedyourfamilytonight.com, and if you ever have questions about it, you can always find me in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group. Tater Tot Casserole is just a fun recipe as we start to move into fall, and the full recipe is at feedyourfamilytonight.com.